Another rainy day, and it seems I've just pulled laundry out of the dryer. I hope you don't mind if I do a little folding and a little mating of some socks while you guys sit around and listen to some great stories. The kiddos have got to have something to wear to school, after all. So, while I do a little bit of laundry, you can join me for some cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? I do sometimes wish there was an easy way to get the things that I want. I'm sure all of you wish there was an easy way to get the things you want. But I find over time that I have a little less trust for those who say that they can get me everything I want, especially if it feels too good to be true. So come along with me while we visit one of those places, and be sure not to sign any deals you get from the Bright Farm.
And so we commit Malcolm Tyler to the earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The dirt hit the top of the child-sized coffin as it slid into its final resting place. John just sat there, surrounded by family and friends, yet utterly alone. Malcolm had been 10, on the cusp of the age of reason. As John looked at the picture of his departed son, he could swear it was one of his own baby pictures. Malcolm had loved baseball, superheroes, Star Wars, and old video games. He had clung to his father's passions, and the two had always been close. As he watched the coffin slip into the earth, John felt the tears slide down his face. They were naked and unashamed. The seat next to him was empty. His wife, Claire, was still in the hospital after the accident that had taken their son. The doctor had told him that she would likely recover, but she might never walk again. They had told him this as though it were a spectacular consolation prize. Your son will never play in the majors or even see the Star Wars movie he was looking forward to, but you can rest assured that your now crippled wife will be home as soon as we're done milking your insurance for all it's worth. He sat there and accepted the pats, the condolences, the meaningless words that fell on him like daggers. His son was gone. These people were telling him how sorry they were for his loss. They didn't know loss. They were going to climb into their vehicle with mostly complete partners and go back to their homes so they could hug their own children and be glad it wasn't them who'd lost someone important. They would put the funeral announcements in a drawer by the door where they kept their keys or their change, and one day they would drag it out by mistake and think how sad it had been that such a youngster had died in the prime of his life. Then they would throw it away or put it in another drawer, and they would probably never think about it again. He seethed over these thoughts as he sat in the hard plastic chair provided by Copeland Funeral Home. He seethed over these people and their routine, unbroken lives until he was the only one there. Then John got up, and he went home. John sat and watched TV, eating his TV dinner without much enthusiasm. The turkey was lumpy and had only cooked in the middle. The mashed potatoes were still half frozen, the gravy like liquid lava. On TV, the news anchor was talking about the Green Man murders. The latest victim, Shelley Rhodes, had been discovered in an alley. The police were looking for someone who might have seen the perpetrator. John watched apathetically as he spooned the mush into his mouth. A commercial came on for Anders Tires, and he tuned it out. Malcolm had been dead for 3 days, and John had done little but wallow in his misery. The house was like a monument to better times. He had stood in the entryway most of the afternoon after the funeral, staring at photos of him and Malcolm at the beach. Claire had taken it after they built that sandcastle they were both hunkered over. They had been at the shore for a week. Malcolm was as brown as a nut after spending 6 days on the beach. The castle had begun as a lopsided thing before John had gotten involved. Malcolm had bought the shoddy plastic molds at the beachside stand, and John had known a thing or two about sandcastle building. Together, they had constructed an elegant castle complete with drawbridge and moat. The turrets had grown out of the sand. The flags had been leaves plucked from a nearby tree. Claire had been laughing as she snapped the photo, and the two of them had been grinning like fools over this accomplishment. John felt tears fall from his eyes, saw them tumble into his unappetizing mashed potatoes, and spooned them into his mouth anyway. Malcolm's room was the worst part of the house. The room stood at the very top of the staircase, easily viewable from the downstairs landing. John had stood in the dark last night and just looked at the doorway from the bottom step. The nightlight cast the scene in a strange shadowverse. He could vaguely see the baseball players trapped in their glory as they hung glossily from the wall by pushpins. He could see the bookshelf where John had taken his son's nightly bedtime story. He could see the balsa wood glider where it hung from the ceiling, the broken wing mocking him. How many times had John promised to fix it? How many times had he told Malcolm he would go buy a tube of airplane glue? How many times had he gone to the store and not done it? He had thought he had time. He had thought he could do it some other when. He had been wrong. He had slept in his recliner every night after that. The phone rang then, dragging him from his misery. The picture on the screen was that of his wife, smiling like she was the happiest woman in the world as Malcolm grinned from her hugging arms. John felt a sob creep up his throat. He would have to change that. He answered it on the 6th ring, saying hello without much enthusiasm. "Hi, John." His wife sounded tired. She sounded like maybe she had been crying, too. She sounded like John felt, ready to just give up and join their son in his eternal rest. John found he didn't have much of a feeling about that. "Hi, Claire. You didn't come to see me today." He didn't have an answer for that, so he said nothing. "Are you okay, John? I'm worried about you." John thought about the question. He was not, he decided, okay, but if he told his wife this, she would worry. He hadn't come to see her today for that reason. Not for the reason that he suspected that she suspected, which was that he blamed her for his son's death. He no more blamed Claire than he blamed the car she had totaled when a semi-truck, driven by a man who was asleep at the wheel, had crushed their car against the guardrail. He didn't blame her for that. It was an event outside her control. He didn't come to see her because she would look at him and know that something was deeply wrong with him. She would see the dark circles, the pallid skin, the dirty face cleaned only by the tears that seemed to run tirelessly, and she would worry. He didn't care about any of that. Not really. But if she told a doctor about these things, John might spend the next few months as a drooling zombie while they pumped him full of dope. John did not want to dope his pain away. He wanted to wallow in it, like a pig wallows in filth. "John, are you mad at me?" He could hear the tears on the verge of bursting. "No, Kay, I'm just tired," he said, using her pet name. "I haven't slept well since..." His own tears slid out again, pale tracks of moisture that always seemed on the verge of falling. "Since the funeral. I wanted to be there for you, and for him, but I know," he lied. John knew very little that he was confident of these days. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay, John. I wish I were there to help you through this. I wish you were here to help me through this." She was crying now. He could almost hear her tears as they slid against the phone. He stared at the TV like a husk, incapable of feeling empathy for his sobbing wife. "I know, but someone has to pay the bills. Now more than ever." "That was a crock," said a voice in his brain. John had no more been to work than he had been upstairs. Mr. Beadle had given him bereavement, and he had taken it without a fight. He had done little more than sit morosely and fulfill his body's needs when they clawed against his consciousness. Feed the machine, empty the tank, sleep, rinse, repeat. It was all becoming very tedious. "You sound tired. I'll let you get to sleep. Will I see you tomorrow?" "Yeah," he said, lying again. "I'll swing by after work and see how you're doing." "I'd like that. I miss you, John. I love you." "I love you too, Kay." The lies came easily. He hung up the phone and continued to wallow. "Are you happy?" asked the man on the TV. He was a tall fellow, sleek black hair, thin mustache that looked oily. He was wearing a butcher's apron over a white shirt and smiling into the camera like he could see through John's TV. It was a little unsettling. John kept watching, figuring the commercial would be over soon. "Feeling empty? Perhaps seeking something you've lost?" John shoveled more food into his mouth, but felt his eyes locked on the greasy salesman. "Here at Bright Farm, we pride ourselves on helping those who are lost come back into the light. Whatever you're seeking, you can be sure that we have it here at Bright Farm. Our counselors are here 24/7 to—" John lifted the remote, a job that seemed harder than it should have, and flipped over to the next channel. "Make sure the light does not escape you in your time of need." What in the hell? It was the same commercial. He clicked over again. "Maybe you've recently had a crisis of faith, suffered an event that's made you question the existence of a bright and shining God. Maybe you've lost your way, no longer feeling that life is worth living." John had changed the channel 7 times while the man was talking, but found him on every channel. For some reason, the man was making him uncomfortable, and he wanted to see anything on the tube at that point. A baseball game, an old movie, a stupid sitcom, anything but this man and his smiling, stupid face. As he watched, the smile seemed to stretch under that mustache, and as he clicked the button to turn the set off, he realized that the man's eyes were fixed directly on him. The man was staring at him through the TV. The veins in his eyes seemed to be pulsating as John watched. "Maybe you've even lost someone you loved. A mother, a brother." His eyes got very intense, and no matter how many times he hit the off button, the TV stayed on. "A son." He was staring right at him now, and clearly only at him. "He's here, John. He's here, and all you have to do is come to him. What are you waiting for, John? Why are you just sitting there, John? He misses you, John." The man was screaming from the TV. John was aware that his dinner was leaking into his sweatpants. He had upset the little plastic tray, but it hardly seemed to matter. The man on the TV was beating his fists against the glass front and yelling at John, questioning him, asking him why he didn't come to his son if he missed him so damn much. John was screaming as he did this, and he came awake all at once. The screen was snow, and he had indeed spilled his dinner. He turned off the television, cleaned up his chair, and thought longingly about going up to bed. It took him only a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs to return to his recliner. He slept fitfully that night. John woke up early the next morning, bright and early. This was something he seemed to be unable to shake from his old life. His job had expected him to arrive at 8 a.m. every day, and his brain seemed hardwired to wake up at 6 a.m. every morning. He thought about going to work. Maybe a day at the office would set him right. He could sit in his office and go over accounts and feel like his usual self. He could pretend that when 5 o'clock came around, he could go home to his loving wife and his best buddy in their 2-bedroom, 2-bath home. And when he got off and drove home, he would find it just that way. He only stood at the foot of the stairs for 20 minutes, seeing the pennants on the wall and watching the broken plane hanging suspended from the ceiling, before turning away and going to the kitchen instead. There would be no normal life for him. Never again. The round cereal clinked into the bowl cheerily. The box declared it was Space Acers, and it was Malcolm's favorite cereal. The marshmallows stood out amongst the grain circles. They were the kind of neon color that only a kid could love, the lumpy multicolor of poor craftsmanship and lack of real care. He saw a tear fall into them as he studied them. He remembered how Malcolm had sung the jingle every time he ate them. He remembered how Malcolm could name all 7 different marshmallow shapes, remembering when he'd gotten so excited over that Captain Acer's decoder ring that he'd found in the box last year. He saw another tear roll into the cereal and turned to get the milk. He opened the door and scanned the pristine white glow of the refrigerator for the carton. He was momentarily worried that it was out of date, but suddenly the happy cow face came into view. When he picked it up, he got a nasty shock as he realized that Bright Farm Dairy was printed over the head of the smiling cow. Had that always been his milk provider? He was sure it had been a different company last week. He turned the carton, reading the side description, feeling a kind of surreal haze roll over him. It told how Bright Farm cows were the happiest cows in the world. It told how Bright Farm was the leading provider of dairy for his area. Then he turned the carton and felt it slip out of his numb fingers. As it fell, he could clearly see the missing child picture side of the carton. The black and white photo made it hard to make out his exact features, but John would know the boy's sandy brown hair and green eyes, even in black and white. He was smiling, as he had been in the beach picture, and under the picture was the legend, "Found child, answers to Malcolm, misses his father, wants to know why his father hasn't come to get him, wants to know why his father doesn't love him." The milk puddled on the ground as his son's face stared up at him from the floor. He felt the tears patter into the pool as he looked down at the spilled milk. "What do you mean you're out of milk?" John had been to 3 different stores, and each of them had been out of milk. The first 2 had little signs taped over the milk coolers saying, sorry, they were out of milk. There had been no one to yell at there, but he had found someone to yell at when he reached the 3rd store. The man in the plastic apron bore it well, clearly not the first irate customer today, and flashed his pasted-on grin in the face of John's ire. "Sorry, sir, but the company had a little trouble with their trucks today. You could try another store, I suppose, but I'm guessing they're all in the same boat." Smug prick, John thought. He knew they were all in the same boat. "You could always go down to Bright Farm and get the milk yourself," the man added, taking a step away as though trying to distance himself from the conversation. John watched him go, breathing out disgustedly as he went back to the parking lot to find his car. He guessed he was going to Bright Farm. Bright Farm looked almost idyllic. John had driven for almost an hour, making his way out of the city's hustle and bustle and into the more rural areas surrounding the town. Here was the farm belt, the farms with acres of land, all planted with vegetables in neat rows, or with livestock happily munching grass in the field. John saw big red barns and farmhouses with long porches, people moving about between them as they went about their daily lives. The road ran on, and when his GPS said he had arrived, he almost didn't believe it. The farm had seemed like a strange place in the infomercial, some kind of farm akin to a backwoods gospel tent, where miracles happened, or at least they claimed they did. This place, though, looked like the farm in the Hidden Valley commercials. The road turned left onto a hard-packed dirt track. John could see fields ripe with produce, an orchard in the distance with happy pickers at work, a long pair of barns for cows or sheep maybe, and several tall wooden houses that looked almost Amish. The sign over the road said, "Bright Farm," in cheery white letters. The place seemed downright peaceful, downright wholesome. John turned his car down the road and drove towards the cluster of buildings. There were 8 two-story buildings of dark brown wood, with heavy windows that looked down from them. To John, they looked like disapproving eyes. Among them, as though surrounded, was a squat little building with a long porch complete with rockers. A sign hung across the roof declaring it to be the General Store. John thought it was as good a place as any for some information, so he mounted the steps and went inside. The bell tinkled overhead merrily. The inside was a packed but orderly arrangement of everything one might need for frontier life at the turn of the century. There were long shelves stacked with sacks of bean and corn, flour and sugar, bolts of cloth and spools of thread, and an overwhelming smell of brine that led him to a huge pickle jar near the front of the door. Behind a long counter stood a man in a butcher's apron, his dark hair and small mustache looking eerily familiar, wearing the biggest smile John had ever seen. He stared intently at John, and the attention made John's skin crawl. "Good morning, stranger. Are you here for the milk?" I guess so," John said. The man cocked his big smiling head and said, Pardon me for saying so, sir, but you don't really seem too sure. I seem to be drawn here for some reason lately. I see your commercials and your products, and they seem to be calling me here." The man cocked his head to the other side, then snapped his fingers loudly. "I thought you looked familiar. You're John, right?" John jumped a little. How did you know my name?" "Oh, we've been waiting for you. We've been keeping something extraordinary for you. It's in the barn. Come on." The shopkeeper went off into the room behind the counter, beckoning John as he left. John felt drawn to follow him, but as he stepped, he contemplated. Was he really going to just follow the stranger into the back of his store? These people clearly wanted him here for some reason. Why give them what they wanted? Unless they might actually have. "Coming?" called a voice from the back. John was around the counter before he could stop himself. He followed the man into the back of the store, a shadowy mountain of creaking shelves. But to his surprise, the man in the apron was already standing by an open back door. He led him out into the bright dooryard and pointed to a long cowshed he had seen before. If he had thought it looked too big from the road, now it seemed to stretch off towards the field for far too long. It wasn't just the length either. The shed looked odd somehow. It looked like the kind of place that held secrets best left unfounded, like a freak show tent or the back room of a snake handler's revival. John hesitated as the man took a step towards the sheds, not wanting to know what lay inside. The man looked back cheerily. "Don't you want to see what we have for you? He's been waiting for so long." "Who?" John asked, but the man was already walking towards the shed, and John had to step quickly to catch up. The shed door creaked open ominously as the shopkeeper slid it to the side. He reached inside and fumbled against the wall with a loud snap, signaling the lights to life. They clicked on rapidly, lighting overhead fluorescence snapping on in a quick pattern that lit the small wooden berth in the long cowshed. As they stepped inside, the man walked briskly, and John tried to follow as his curious eyes also tried to take in what lay inside of each berth. Most were people, confused and naked as they sat in the straw, but some were full of objects or money or precious items. The worst was the shadowy stall that held things with red eyes and furtive breaths. They huddled in the darkness and looked at him as he went past. Their eyes held no recognizable emotion except hate. After a minute of quick walking, they came to a stop. The man extended his hand towards a closed stall. "This is it. Hurry up. He's waiting for you." John was a few steps behind him, the berth next to this one holding a smashed-up Mercedes. When he heard the man speak, his voice echoing in this strangely quiet place, John shivered a little. He didn't want to disturb the things here, many of which were rather disturbing on their own. John didn't want to know what might happen if they suddenly decided to leave their stalls and come out where they could get at him. As he came up to the gate of the berth in question, he could see a small, naked boy of about 10 sitting on the floor, his knees hugged up to his chest. A head of sandy blonde hair was visible between his knees, and John felt his breath stick in his chest. The hair was soft, baby fine, and looked recently washed. It sat artlessly on top of his small head, just as Malcolm's always had. John felt the tears slide down his face as he remembered how it had poked out underneath his baseball cap when he pulled it down to get it out of his face. Then the boy looked up with those two green eyes, and John saw Malcolm smile at him from the straw-strewn floor. "Daddy?" the boy asked, as though he didn't quite dare believe it. It was too much. John felt his knees unhinge, and suddenly he was falling into darkness as the naked boy rose from the floor and came to peek at him through the stall door. The last thing he saw before he blacked out were those two green eyes as they bore into him. He came awake with those eyes staring at him. Someone had put him in a bed. The sheets were soft and luxurious, but the blankets were like sandpaper as he lay atop them. The boy perched on his chest was digging into him painfully, and as he woke up, the boy smiled and crawled to snuggle under the blanket. He wrapped his small arms around him and noticed the uncomfortable fabric not at all. John felt the comfortable press of his son's as he lay beside him. How many days had he woken up just like this? Malcolm pressed between him and his wife as they slept together, his warm comfort against John's back as he warmed in between them. John wrapped his own arms around him and breathed in the scent of fabric softener, off-brand shampoo his wife bought for them, and the warm grass that always seemed to hang around his son. John opened his eyes. He expected to wake up in his own bed, the dream evaporating around him, but Malcolm was still there. The door opened then. The man from behind the counter walked in, his hard boots knocking on the wooden floor, and he smiled his too-wide smile at John. "You're awake," he stated. John sat up and put a protective arm around his son. The boy was dressed in a pair of overalls, a blue shirt beneath, but John saw that he was still wearing the clothes he had arrived in. The room was Spartan, a bed and an end table being their only real elements, and as the smiling man towered over them, John began to feel self-conscious. He slid out of bed, Malcolm still clinging to him, and faced the man. "How is it that you came to have my son?" The man shrugged. "The farm knows what people want. It knows what people need. One day I was sweeping up, and he was just sitting there. He looked up with those big green eyes and asked where his daddy was, and I just knew that sooner or later you'd come looking for him." John ruffled the boy's hair. "I'm glad I did. It seems like everything lately was trying to bring me here." "Are you hungry?" the smiling man asked suddenly. "Margaret is just about to have lunch ready, and she'd be tickled pink if you'd join us." John looked down at Malcolm's two green eyes and smiled. "Sure, why not?" They spent the rest of the day together. After lunch, Thomas took them down to feed day-old bread to the ducks in the little pond. Thomas, the smiling man, had finally introduced himself. As he and his wife, a smiling plump woman of middle age, had fed them from their table, John couldn't take his eyes off of Malcolm. The boy dug into the meal just as his boy always had, like it might be the last one he ever had. And when Margaret offered him a piece of pie, the boy's eyes lit up with excitement. How many birthdays had John seen that same excitement cross his face as the cake came out? Malcolm caught John staring at him and smiled shyly as Margaret added a big scoop of ice cream to go with it. After the ducks, Malcolm noticed a playground in the town commons. He drugged John to a small clearing with wooden climbing courses and metal antiques that spun and bobbled. As John sat and watched, other kids came over to play with Malcolm in that effortless way that children often do. Watching Malcolm play, running during tag or jumping or loping during their make-believe games, filled John with a curious mixture of hope and dread. He hoped this would never end. He hoped he had crashed his car on the way to the farm and this was heaven, and that he could simply sit here and watch his boy play for the rest of his days. At the same time, he dreaded when this would have to end, and his sadness would creep back as the delusion or dream or whatever it was finally ended. "It's best not to think too hard about that, John." John jumped. Thomas had seated himself next to him, the stretched skin on his mouth still fashioned in that rictus of a smile that up close seemed almost painful. Why did he smile like that if the act hurt him? He tried to find his words, but they all seemed to muddy in his mind in the face of that bitter smile. To think about what? How he can be, or how he came to be here. He is here. He's your son, and it's best not to think about it. John watched him as though he might vanish if he looked away. "We can make a place for you here," Thomas continued. "A place for you and Malcolm. You can be part of this community and know the blessing of the bright, as we all do." John snapped his gaze back to Thomas. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" Thomas put his old worn hands on his knees and grinned. "Well, you're here now. We have to find the two of you a place in our community." "Why would I do that?" John asked, genuinely perplexed. "Well, you can't leave. The two of you have to stay." John felt himself growing angry, but tried to keep it in check. This man had given him an irreplaceable gift, and it wouldn't be good manners to shout at him. Are you trying to tell me that we can't leave?" Thomas shrugged. "Of course not. You're free to leave at any time. But Malcolm, he is of the bright. You can't take him away from here. It would be cruel to do so." Malcolm ran up about that time. his face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, some of the kids want to know if we'll attend service with them this evening. Can we go? It sounds like fun." John collected Malcolm into his arms then and stood towering over the smiling Thomas. "No, son. I think it's time we left. Your mother will never believe it when I show you to her." But just the thought of sharing Malcolm made John feel strange. Thomas seemed unperturbed by John. "I wouldn't do that, friend. It never ends well. Just leave us alone. All of you, just leave us alone," John said, backing away. He was running by the time he made it to the parking lot. Malcolm's familiar weight carried effortlessly. John's car was conspicuously absent. He had thought it was some kind of illusion. The tan-colored car would appear when he got a little closer. But now he saw that even the ruts he had left in the dirt were gone. The car was missing. He was left with few options for escape. He turned towards the road and saw the quaint wooden gate rising in the distance. It could have been 50 feet. It could have been 50 miles. John didn't care. As the sun set at his back, he began to walk towards the gate. "Daddy, don't. I feel sick," Malcolm whined. John ignored him, clinging to him as he jogged for the gate. He could flag down a car once they made it to the road. After all, this was a busy road, and a passing trucker or traveler would take them back to the city. They could be home by bedtime. Malcolm could sleep in his own bed beneath the watchful eye of his baseball posters and his Star Wars ships that hung from the ceiling by fishing line. "Daddy!" Malcolm's voice sounded hoarse. The dirt puffed under his feet as he jogged. With every step, he expected a torch-bearing mob to rise up to block their path. They wouldn't want him to take this miracle child from them, something that should not exist, and they would fight to stop him from leaving. He would fight them. They would kill him, but he would fight them. He would die, but his last image would be of Malcolm as he, "Stop it! I feel sick, Daddy! I don't want to leave! I want to! I want to!" Malcolm became dead weight in his arms as he jogged. The stile came up before him, and he hefted the child into his arms as he ran. Malcolm was heavy, his skin clammy. Something like sweat or tears dampened John's shirt as he ran. He was suddenly fearful. What if they had poisoned him? What if they had done something to Malcolm so he couldn't leave? He finally looked down at his precious son and screamed into what had once been Malcolm's face. John found he was holding something akin to a lump of clay in his arms, just like a child's approximation of a person. The arms were thick and lumpy, the body little more than a badly formed torso of androgynous humps. The head was malformed, its eyes and mouth little more than scooped-out holes with tufts of hair shoved hastily into the muck. When it turned its face to him and spoke, Malcolm rasped out garbled words full of pain and confusion. John felt that he must surely be going mad. He fell to his knees, the gates within arm's reach, and wept into the bulbous chest of Malcolm's newly formed body. This was unbearable. To lose his son again, and in such a way as this, was unthinkable. He couldn't recover from this. If this was really some dream, then this would be the part where he would wake up screaming into his pillow. Things like this didn't happen under the eyes of a loving God. There was only so much pain a man could take before he broke completely. He knelt in the dirt and sobbed into the mushy chest of his twice-lost son, praying for insanity, praying for an end to understanding. It was dark when Thomas found them. John didn't shudder or even acknowledge him when he put a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to him, and in the moonlight, his smile looked ghoulish. "Why?" John croaked, his face awash with the muddy flesh of his still croaking boy. "Why?" Thomas only shook his head, grinning. "I tried to tell you, friend. The gifts of Bright Farm are only for those who accept the bright. The miracles experienced here are not for the outside world. If you want to stay with Malcolm, then you must stay near the bright." John turned back to the odd boy thing. He stared at it for a long time. "If I accept this bright, my son will be returned to me?" "As he was before," Thomas assured. John looked away, and in the moonlight his martyr's mask was ghastly, with the mush of his son's chest. "Show me." Thomas took him by the hand. He led John towards the chapel that lay beyond the cowshed. Inside, a sun seemed to shine only for those within. As they approached, John could feel it baking him and felt the warmth fill him. He felt his fear, his anger, his sadness, and all his doubt burned from him. Someone by the wooden door took the boy shape from him, and at that moment he barely noticed. He had discovered something new, something old. As the doors were opened and the baking bright shone over him, he felt his lips pulled into a painful smile. The bright was all he ever needed, the thing he wanted but never knew. He was burned anew by the bright, and it was good. The van pulled up in the dirt parking lot of the little community. The ramp came down, and the sandy-haired woman rolled her wheelchair onto the metal slab. As it descended, she began looking at the gawking faces that had gathered to see her descent. She had used a wheelchair since the accident, but she refused to let it stop her. Even if she had to crawl, she wouldn't have allowed it to stop her from finding John. For 6 months, she'd recovered in the hospital alone. For 6 months, he had ignored her phone calls. When the bank had called to let her know that her mortgage hadn't been paid in 6 months, she was worried. When the police called her to tell her her husband's car had been found abandoned on the stretch of road leading up to this place, she was terrified. When her friend Lisa had seen him at the farmer's market, selling quilts and homegrown vegetables, she was furious. He had abandoned their old life to find himself in the country, it seemed, leaving her in the ICU to fight for her life and worry about him as he slid into silence. She meant to find him and make him answer for his absence. The wheels of the chair didn't much care for the dirt path that led up to the 2-story houses that seemed to be the living quarters of this little community. The man on the phone had told her that John lived in the house closest to the playground, and as she rolled towards that playground, she felt her arms grow stiff and non-compliant. She sat in the dirt road and gawked at the perfect, sandy-haired boy that was now standing atop the play structure and laughing with the other overall-clad children. Malcolm. It was Malcolm. He looked at her then, and she saw recognition dawn on his face. He jumped from the structure, landing in that way that seems the providence of only children and drunks, and ran to her with guileless joy. He buried his face against her chest, rubbing his soft hair against her, and fixed her with those deep green eyes that had enchanted her since birth. It was him, in the flesh, and as he hugged her, she could no more summon the strength to hug him back than she could have summoned the strength to strangle him to death. "Mommy! Mommy! I missed you!" She saw a man rise from the bench, and through his tangled beard she could see it was John. He was smiling, his face a rictus of pleasured pain. His mouth smiled, but as she saw his eyes, she felt a stab of pain rip through her heart. His eyes were pinched, screaming, and as he approached, he seemed to be begging her to run. He bent to hug her, melding against his son easily as the two embraced her like some lost relation who had come back again. How is this possible, John? He smiled at her with that painful grin. "Come to the barn, Claire. All things can be found if you're willing to see the light."
Don't mind my unmentionables. I'll move those to the side while I start on the towels. A man's got to cover his modesty somehow, after all. Seems like just about the right time of year to be talking about pumpkins. There are lots of different ones. I've been seeing a rise in the number of heirloom pumpkins that I see at the grocery store lately, and they're always kind of a strange treat to see their warty and knobbly exteriors looking up at me from a bin of pumpkins. Well, let's hope in your search for pumpkins you don't get one of the ones in today's story, because, God forbid, you might get your hands on a blood pumpkin.
What in the hell
are those? Clarence had gone to Reggie's Veggies to buy seeds, just as he had every year since Reggie had opened. David Decker probably bought his seeds here too, Clarence reflected. It was part of the reason that Clarence kept coming back. The fact that Reggie was a friend since boyhood, and Clarence taking his business to a new feed store up the road would hurt his feelings, was secondary. Clarence wanted to beat David, wanted to beat him so bad he could taste it. David was a bit of a local celebrity, a legend in the agricultural community, and he'd grown the biggest pumpkins in the county for the last 5 years running. For the last 5 years, Clarence had been content with second place, but he felt that this year was different somehow. This was the year that he beat David Decker and took his rightful place as the biggest pumpkin grower in the county. This year was also different because Reggie said he had something special for Clarence. He had what he called a secret weapon, and he assured him that it would finally wipe the smile off old Decker's face. Reggie had no reason to dislike Decker. He was probably one of Reggie's best customers after all. But the old man had been getting cocky lately, and his bravado had turned the humble produce seller's stomach. Clarence picked up the packet and looked at it. It was just a normal pack of seeds, maybe a little old and crumpled, but clearly just seeds. Reggie had found them in a trunk that had belonged to his grandfather, and they had looked eldritch on the semi-modern countertop. The paper had taken on that soft, velvety feel of a material that has seen the fall of the Second World War, and the seeds inside felt like hard little bullets under Clarence's thumb. The paper declared them to be Blutkürbisser, and everything on the package was in a foreign language. He would have sworn it was something that Reggie had bought from a joke shop, if he wasn't so serious. To be sure, Reggie was a practical joker, but his face was stone-cold serious as he looked at him from across the counter of his vegetable stand. "Blood pumpkins," Clarence said skeptically. "Blood pumpkins," Reggie intoned, back with deep seriousness. "I don't know, Reggie. These things look older than God. You sure they'll grow?" "Absolutely." Reggie stretched the word into 3. "Granddad bought 'em back when he was in Germany. He said the pumpkins he saw over there were huge." Clarence scoffed. "Your granddad was a sodbuster, just like mine, Reggie. When did he go to Germany?" "During the war, same as your granddad, except your granddad spent it in Alaska." Clarence wanted to take offense to that, but Reggie was right. Granddad had gotten a very cushy post, while Reggie's granddad had gotten half his leg blown off by a potato masher and was sent home with honors. Reggie's granddad had used the payout from the government to buy the building where the feed store now sat, while Clarence's grandfather had used his payout to buy the land where his farm was. Just because Reggie Sr. had been a drunk who had squandered the family business was no fault of his. "Let me get my usual spread of regular pumpkins too, Reggie, just to be safe. So, how do these work anyway? Any special instructions for these German pumpkins?" Granddad always said that the man who gave him the seeds said that a sacrifice was required to see them reach their full potential. What that sacrifice was, the man wouldn't say. Granddad figured if anyone knew anything about sacrifices, it'd be farmers, like you and me. Reggie wasn't wrong. All farming was one sacrifice after another. Farmers sacrificed their time, their love, their family, their hair, and damn near everything else so they could afford to keep the taxes paid and the lights on year after year. Sod bustin' was nothing but sacrifice in many ways, and Clarence figured he'd plant the seeds and see what came of them. He honestly figured he'd get more out of the other packs of seeds than these old pumpkin bullets anyway. He would look back on that moment and reflect that he had known nothing of sacrifice. The seeds went into the ground in the east field, just like generations of pumpkins had before them. As he stood up and rubbed the dirt from his hands, he looked across the field he had nurtured and felt the same sense of pride he always did. Corn was coming up, potatoes and yams, beans and peanuts. The fruit trees were filling the orchard with their sweet scent, and now the pumpkins would be the crowning jewel of his farm. The July sun beat down on him, and he shaded his eyes as he surveyed his kingdom. Clarence knew it wouldn't be long before harvest time. Soon the fields would be filled with the sounds of picking and packing, and it would be time to take another load down to Reggie's so he could sell his wares. Clarence could lay enough back to make it through the winter, and maybe even a little more for the inevitable repairs to the barn or the house, maybe for some expansion next year when the taxes came in. And, he reflected, once he won this year's grand prize for biggest pumpkin, Clarence could open up his own stall the following spring and sell his own wares, just like his father used to. It was a great plan, and now it was time to see if it could bear fruit. Pumpkins grew pretty quickly, as pumpkins do, but after a month, Clarence had 3 that he believed would be real contenders. He had named them, as he did every year, and the names he had chosen were no less grand than the pumpkins themselves. Hercules, Goliath, and Sampson dwarfed their fellows by quite a bit, and it seemed that they would be the entries this year. Some people thought it was silly to name a pumpkin, but Clarence always named the ones he thought would be entries in the fair. The other 40 or so would be sold to pie makers, pumpkin carvers, and all sorts of other folks. But these 3 would be weighed, judged, and then made into pies by Mrs. Clarence for the pie contest to be held 2 days hence. He always laughed about it, but Clarence always felt a little sorry to see her make those pumpkins into pies after he'd worked so hard raising them. On the other hand, the blood pumpkin had sprouted only a single offering. Clarence had named him Fritz and set him apart from the rest. So far, it was underperforming, and Clarence didn't think it would amount to much. Fritz wasn't even as big as most of his regular pumpkins, but he kept tending it in hopes that maybe Fritz was just a late bloomer. He'd been surprised when he'd gotten a pumpkin at all from the seeds, and Clarence had held out hope that maybe Reggie's granddad was right about those pumpkins that would be bigger than the regular ones. He pruned it and weeded it by hand, just as he did with the other 3, in the hopes that maybe it would grow bigger and he could sell it as an oddity at Reggie's stand. While his other pumpkins were orange, this one was a deeper orange, like a blood orange, and its leaves had a strange wilted look to them. Clarence was certain that it would make someone an extra creepy jack-o'-lantern when Halloween rolled around, but he really didn't have high hopes for the stunted little thing other than that. Then, one morning, after caring for it for the past 4 weeks, Clarence was in for a surprise. A painful surprise. Clarence was out tending to the pumpkins, tracking their growth as he nurtured them. His top 3 were still larger and fuller than the others, and Goliath was quickly showing himself to be the front-runner for this year's contest winner. He was pruning around Fritz, his mind wandering, when the shears caught the edge of his index finger. It wasn't a deep cut, but like any wound, it bled a little bit. Clarence snatched his finger back and put it in his mouth, but not before a few drops of blood splattered on the earth around the pumpkin. He didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a cut, and he slid the bandana out of his pocket and held it to the wound. He waited for the bleeding to stop and then got back to work. He didn't think anything about it until the next day. When he went to go check on the pumpkins, Clarence noticed something odd had happened. It wasn't substantial. The pumpkin hadn't grown giant overnight, but the blood pumpkin had grown. The day before, it had been no bigger than a craft store decoration, but now it bulged from the ground like a blood-red tumor. Overnight, it had become larger than Sampson, the smallest of his entries for the fair. Clarence scratched his head as he took in the anomaly, getting knee-bound so he could take a better look at Fritz. He had done nothing different besides giving it his blood. Then he remembered what Reggie had said. The plant required a sacrifice. The pumpkin needed something more than water and sunlight to thrive, and Clarence suddenly wondered how big Fritz could get. Wasn't the notion of beating Decker worth a little blood? As though in a daze, Clarence pulled out his buck knife and slid the blade across the meat of his palm. The sting was little more than an afterthought, and as he squeezed his fingers together, he watched a scarlet stream fall onto the soil beneath the pumpkin. The drops splashed onto the vines as well, a single fat drop splattering the body of the gourd, and as it fell, Clarence could swear he heard it growing. It was a soft, whispery sound, like the trees in a light wind, and as the ground drank his blood, it left nothing behind. It grew before his eyes, looking bigger than it had a minute ago. Clarence wrapped the same bandana around his hand and got back to work. The pumpkins required a lot of TLC, but it would all be worth it once he wiped the smile off of David Decker's face. When he returned the next day, Fritz had grown 3 inches overnight. For the next 2 weeks, Clarence made a splash of his blood a regular part of the pumpkin's diet. It was never much, the amount you'd get from a diabetes test, but in 2 weeks, he noticed a change in the size of the blood pumpkin. It grew as big as any of the pumpkins Clarence had planned to enter, overshadowing Goliath by a large margin. By the last week of August, Fritz was the clear entry for the fair this year. The sight of Fritz filled Clarence with pride, but it also made his finger itch. Anyone who cared to look would have seen the bruises on his fingertips and palms. Mrs. Clarence had certainly made a lot of them as she doctored them at the dining room table, but she was the only one so far. The farm had a lot of visitors in the last week of August, to his surprise, and it seemed that someone had seen his blood pumpkin. It was his neighbor first. He could hardly miss a pumpkin that was nearly 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide. He wondered if he could come and have a look, and Clarence had taken him to the field to see it personally. After that, he was visited every day by curious townfolk wanting to see this miraculous pumpkin. They were never unsupervised, of course. As he spent more and more time with the pumpkin, Clarence was becoming quite protective of it. He began to worry that this was as large as it was going to get, topping out just shy of 5 feet, and he started increasing the amount of blood he gave it. He was back to cutting his palm for the fat red drops he'd gotten before, but even that didn't make it grow. The ground drank, but the whispers never happened. Clarence slept poorly, beginning to neglect his other crops, and Fritz the blood pumpkin became somewhat of an obsession. On the 4th of October, Clarence got the visit he'd been expecting. He called on him early, just a short series of knocks that drug him from the table where he'd been listlessly eating his breakfast. He was dressed in overalls and a blue work shirt, boots with run-down heels after many years of use, and a round-top brown hat that was probably meant to make him look like a cowboy, but just made him look more like a farmer from a John Wayne movie. He hadn't taken the hat off, and just stood grinning on the front porch as though they were the best of friends. "David," Clarence said, hiding his mistrust behind a grin, "what brings you all the way out here this early?" "Well, I'd heard tell that I might have a spot to worry about this year. Seems like you've got a real contender on your hands. Mind if I get a look?" Clarence sniffed, sure that he'd heard all kinds of things. Clarence was sure he'd seen pictures and heard gossip, but in the end, Decker decided that he really wanted a look at this miraculous pumpkin. As sure as Decker was, Clarence was just as sure that he didn't want him to see his blood pumpkin. Maybe it was jealousy, maybe it was mean-spirited, but he felt like it might be something else. Clarence was pretty sure that the pumpkin didn't want Decker to see it. "Sorry, David, you want to see my pumpkin, you'll have to wait till the contest." Clarence swung the door closed, the conversation at an end, just like the pleasantries, and found the tip of one of those run-down boots blocking the way. "Come on now, just a peek. Hell, you let half the town see it, so what's the harm in letting me have a gander?" "I said no, David," Clarence said, his voice a little harder than he strictly meant it to be. "You can see it in 3 weeks, when it's got a blue ribbon attached to it." He moved his foot then, allowing Clarence to close the door, but when he nodded his head and showed him a big grin, Clarence knew it wasn't a genuine smile like he'd seen before. "Suit yourself, then. I'm sure I'll see it in due time." He was right, of course, but seeing would prove to be Decker's undoing. He got his look 3 nights later. Clarence stiffened when he heard the sound of someone cursing softly. He was in bed, his wife snoring peacefully beside him. He had been unable to sleep, his eyes making a map of the dark topography of the ceiling, when he heard the noise from the yard. It could have been the wind, but he knew it wasn't. Clarence felt himself getting out of bed and walking down the hall as he made his way into the kitchen. He moved around the dark table and stood in the screen door as he gazed at the shadowy east field. It was late, midnight by the clock on the stove, and there would have been no way for Clarence to see anyone in the field at all. Standing in the dark kitchen, though, he became very sure that he could see someone walking into the field. carrying something with a long handle. Clarence sleepwalked from the house, silent as a ghost, and though the October wind sent goosebumps up his bare arms, he hardly noticed. As he passed by the woodpile, his hands clambered out to wrap around the old, splintery axe that sat beside the ancient stump. As he approached, Clarence saw the person staring at the pumpkin, staring at Fritz, and in the moonlight, it was easy to see them transfixed by the silhouette of that swollen gourd. They stood stock still, contemplating the next thing they meant to do, and Clarence was less than 30 feet away when they raised the tool and swung it down into the pumpkin with a wet, meaty thunk. Clarence screamed in anguish as he ran, bare feet slapping the earth as he churned up the ground. The person must have heard him, because they turned mid-swing. In the moonlight, Clarence failed to register the round-crowned hat and the face full of white, snarling teeth. In his rage, it didn't matter who it was. He had hurt his pumpkin, and now he would end him. He buried the axe in their chest, blade biting into the wood of the hoe, which they had tried to block the swing with, and as the wood splintered, he saw the blood splash across his undershirt. David Decker looked at him with stunned and unbelieving eyes, but those eyes didn't fill with fear until something wrapped around his ankle. His blood had fallen on the ground between them, and even now the earth was drinking it greedily. He turned drunkenly, axe still buried in his chest, and as he did, he fell to the ground as the blood began to bubble from his lips. The red fell on the face of that unholy gourd, and Clarence saw it grow and writhe before his very eyes. Its vines twined around him, long stalks wrapping him like the coils of a monstrous snake, and all at once the earth began to writhe and churn as its roots came up to join its tendrils. In his terror, David struggled. His hands lashed out feebly with the broken hoe as he was dragged beneath the soil. Clarence watched as he disappeared into the earth and seemed to come back to himself as his rival disappeared. He felt his knees unhinge all at once and was knee-bound on the soil. As the roots began to slide over him as well, his mind just slipped away as the shadow of the blood pumpkin fell across him, now 6 or 7 feet tall and 5 or 6 feet wide. He could hear it growing and groaning. It grew with a sound like a thin tree in a high wind, and as Clarence blacked out, he never expected to have another thought on God's green earth besides that last. He thought that maybe he had finally made his sacrifice, and that this pumpkin would take him into the earth as its next meal. It might have been kinder if it had. Clarence woke up in the field with his wife standing over him. The pumpkin, that 7-foot-tall behemoth of orange skin and green vines, towered over them both. His shirt was clean, the ground undisturbed, and all signs pointed to the night's events being just a dream, except for the broken hoe and the ugly little scar on the left side of Fritz where the hoe had bitten into him. David Decker was never seen again. The sheriff found his truck not far from the farm, and he came by one afternoon to ask Clarence some questions. The old sheriff sat at the table as his wife sat out lunch, tipping his cigarette ash into a saucer as Mrs. Clarence shot him dark looks for stinking up her kitchen. He asked all the expected questions. Had they seen him? Had he been here? And did Clarence know anything about his disappearance? Clarence told him no. He told him that he had seen David yesterday, but he had left and gone wherever it was he had returned to. Clarence couldn't very well tell him that one of the pumpkins had eaten Decker up and stay out of the nut house. Sheriff made some notes, but ultimately dumped his ash into the garbage can and took his leave. He said the visit was just a courtesy anyway, and that they wouldn't keep Clarence from his harvest. The harvest that year was tremendous. The blood pumpkin wasn't the only thing that had benefited from David's sacrifice, and the yield that year was so great that Clarence could have bought his own stand without the money from winning the contest. That hardly mattered to him, though. Nothing really mattered at that point. By that time, Clarence didn't care about anything but the pumpkin and keeping it happy.
October 15th, 5 days before the contest, he began to notice a change in Fritz. Though still connected to the ground and still 7 feet tall, it was beginning to take on a definite sag. It was waxy looking, possessed of an over-ripeness, and Clarence had serious doubts that it would make it to the fair. The blood would no longer sustain it, and whatever it had gotten from David was gone now. It appeared another sacrifice was required, but Clarence didn't have the strength to catch its food for it. The pumpkin was his obsession, but he just didn't have the resolve to feed his neighbors to it. He was sitting at the kitchen table one morning, trying to figure out what to do, when Providence provided. Though unwilling to lure victims for his monstrous gourd, he couldn't stand the idea that it would be lost so soon. To have come so far and stumbled at the finish line was unthinkable, but to give the pumpkin the sacrifice it desired was equally as barbaric. Clarence had no clue what to do, and even from here, he could see the pumpkin waning. It had grown so large that he could see it from almost any place that overlooked the backyard, and the sight of it was awe-inspiring. Had there ever been such a pumpkin as this? Had anyone ever grown a pumpkin so grand? And now, he was just going to let it die. He was weighing his options when the knock came at the door. Clarence shuffled numbly to the door, and to his surprise, he found Reggie standing on the front porch, wiping sweat from his brow and smiling hugely. Reggie, the only one left in town who hadn't come to see the pumpkin. "Thought it was time that I came for a look. They say in town that this pumpkin's something to see." Clarence nodded, a wad of cotton resting in his throat, as an opportunity presented itself before his very eyes. His wife was out visiting a sick friend. The usual crowds had dissipated for now, and this was the first day in weeks he hadn't had to play tour guide. It was just Reggie and Clarence, and he wanted to see the pumpkin, the one he'd heard so much about around the stand. Reggie had walked from his farm a few blocks away. He'd probably told no one where he was going. Clarence offered him a glass of tea as he walked through the kitchen, and then he took him to the east field so he could marvel at the pumpkin. As he gawped in disbelief, Clarence slipped his hand into his pocket. "This is wild. Granddad said they were big, but this is huge." Clarence wrapped a hand around the buck knife he'd used to feed it his own blood. Even if Decker hadn't disappeared, I'm pretty sure that even he couldn't have grown something this big. Reggie had his back to him, and he didn't see the knife slide out. "What have you been feeding this thing? Granddad said it took a sacrifice, but you must have spent a lot of time out here." He was so lost in his own ramblings, he didn't hear the metallic click as the knife came open. "Unless you've been making actual sacrifices out here in the East Field," he said, jokingly. "What's your secret, buddy? Virgin blood? Goat's blood? A little full moon?" He stopped talking when the knife slipped into the side of his neck, stopped talking, and started gurgling. The ground accepted him, and when his wife got home from her friend's house, the pumpkin was 12 feet tall. A week later, the judges came to Clarence's house to see Fritz the behemoth. Clarence won the contest, hands down. It wasn't even a contest. The judges couldn't find a pumpkin even half as large as this, and when Mrs. Clarence came for her yearly sacrifice for the pie contest, he gave her the other 3 instead. She seemed disappointed. Perhaps she had noticed what a mania this pumpkin had become for her husband, but she took them anyway, and won the pie contest that year with the tastiest pie the judges had ever had. As she left the field, her arms laden with pumpkins, Clarence first heard the slithery voice of the serpent as it offered its apple. The voice was autumn wind and winter promises, but he had heard it before, hadn't he? It was the voice that tells the farmer he can squeeze one more crop before the winter. The voice that tells the prideful that it won't be that cold tonight, so there's no need to bring the livestock in. It's the voice of creeping winter that hungers for its sacrifice. The voice told Clarence that if it gave the field his wife, his fame would be eternal. On that day, Clarence turned away from it. On that day, he was strong. The sounds of laughing children and swaying scarecrows filled the air as the plastic flags snapped in the breeze. The annual pumpkin patch was something that Clarence looked forward to with great anticipation, and this year he had a prize-winning pumpkin to display amongst the others. He had always played second fiddle to David Decker and his pumpkin patch, but this year, Clarence was the star of the show. It appeared there was a new local celebrity, though Clarence suspected that it was the gargantuan that sat behind the little fence in the patch that people had come to see. Clarence had arrayed the smaller pumpkins for sale, and even Hercules sat amongst them since he'd been spared the pie. The people milled about the patch, looking in awe at Fritz the behemoth as they made their choices. Clarence was at the card table where they sat the cash box, his wife playing the dutiful hostess out in the fields. From his vantage point behind the table, Clarence saw the kid when he stepped a little too close to the massive pumpkin. He wanted to say something to him, tell the kid to back up, but he hesitated as he watched him waddle closer. Look at the kid. He was a porker. He was a hefty kid from a family of hefty adults, and he had stopped to stare at the pumpkin as he held one of his smaller cousins in his pudgy hand. All at once, he shifted the pumpkin under his arm and stepped towards the monstrous gourd with a hand outstretched to touch. Clarence wanted to say something, should have stopped the kid before he could get any closer, but as Clarence started to raise his voice to warn him, he heard the voice of the serpent again, asking him to stand aside, commanding him to stand aside. The mustached man cleared his throat at Clarence, and Clarence sat back down. He reached for the man's money, his eyes straying to the boy as he laid one fat pink starfish hand against the red skin of the monster. He cast his eyes away, but even that didn't save him from witnessing the end. The kid went into the ground without a sound, and when the pumpkin shattered on the ground next to the gargantuan one, no one was the wiser. The police were called when the absence was noticed, and they searched the field and the forest beyond for weeks without finding a thing. The boy's parents sat at the kitchen table, his mother crying into a square of silk as Clarence's wife poured tea and assured her he'd turn up. She had kept right on assuring her of that until 10 o'clock that night. Clarence was lucky his wife was such a hostess, because all he could do was sit, shell-shocked in a chair, as she puttered around and made small talk. Everyone thought he was broken up about the kid, and in a way, they were right. After all, it's not every day you watch a kid get pulled into the soil while no one's looking. Clarence saw the flashlight lights from the inside of the tent as the fair raged outside. They had given him his own circus tent to draw in the crowd, and Clarence had no lack of people wanting to see the pumpkin. It wasn't every day you got to see a 20-foot-tall pumpkin, and he'd been making the circuit for the better part of 4 months. People were always amazed that the pumpkin stayed so fresh, so alive, but Clarence knew the reason. The best fertilizer always seemed to walk through the flap of his tent, didn't it? He won the contest the year after the kid had disappeared, too. People said he had a knack for growing pumpkins, but really, it was the same one. When it got 18 feet tall and 12 feet wide, it started to attract tourists from some of the local hollers. Some of them never made it back to wherever they had been from either, but the wrecker never asked too many questions when they came to tow their cars. By that point, Clarence was numb to the sacrifice. The pumpkin ate, the pumpkin grew, and as the tourists began to pay to see it, Clarence found that he didn't have to be a farmer anymore. The pumpkin made his farm a natural spot for tourists on the road, and they never grumbled too much about a few dollars here and there to see it. That was how he came to be on the road and in this tent. The man in the suit had offered him a startling amount of money if he'd go on the road with his gourd, and Clarence knew he'd be a fool if he didn't take him up on it. They loaded it up on a flatbed and took it to the county fair after county fair so the whole state could see the world's biggest pumpkin. They did it for 5 years, and in those 5 years, Clarence remembered hearing about a suspected serial killer plaguing the state. They dubbed him the County Fair Kidnapper, and in 5 years he abducted more than 20 children and 5 adults from state fairs across the state. The state police even questioned Clarence, though not as a suspect. They wanted to see if he'd seen anything amiss, and he always told them no. He hardly had a choice, after all. If he'd suddenly told them that his prize-winning pumpkin was eating people at an alarming rate, they'd have slapped him in the loony bin. Clarence knew he wasn't blameless in the whole affair, but the pumpkin was good for his family. The pumpkin was good for the town, after all. In truth, the massive pumpkin in Clarence's east field was the only thing that kept the town from being just another cow-flop Midwestern nothing. The pumpkin brought in the crowds, and the crowds stopped in at the cafe to have a bite. They stopped at the gas station for gas and road snacks. They stopped at the farmer's market to buy fresh produce. They spread their money up and down the street from May till November, and the town always had a corn maze or a fair to draw some of it away from the pumpkin and back into the town proper. At one point, Clarence's face and a picture of the pumpkin were even on the town sign when you drove over the city limits. "Come see the world's biggest pumpkin," it stated, in bold black letters, and at one point, you could damn near see the thing from the city outskirts. In its heyday, it towered nearly 30 feet high and was wider than the farmhouse. By this time, Clarence was blind to its feedings for the most part. Hell, by this point, Clarence was complicit in the murders. He had killed 2 for Fritz already, and was responsible for all the rest as far as he was concerned. He had turned aside, hadn't he? He was content to sit in his lawn chair by the fence and charge people for the opportunity to stand at the base of the giant and feel small in the shadow of a pumpkin. Unfortunately, Clarence had made the same mistake that many men in his position make. He had lived in the shadow of the dragon for so long that he believed he was safe, that his family was safe. It depended on him, after all, and he believed that he and his family were safe from that slithering grasp. Even after 5 years, he didn't really grasp its slyness, its cunning, until it finally took someone that he couldn't turn away from. It happened suddenly, but the horror of it would never leave him, no matter how long he lived. He was standing in the back door, watching her work in the garden. He was trying to ignore the creeping voice as it told him it needed to feed. She was out in the field, tending some vegetables in the space he no longer used, and as he watched her, he began to wonder if he might resist this evil and win free. Clarence had been this pumpkin's puppet for nearly 8 years. 8 long years of dragging its burden around his neck, and his heart was growing heavy with the burden of that sin. As he watched her in her purity and love, he began to think that he might escape this evil thing and be the man he once was. They could leave, just pack their things and go. They could leave this cursed earth behind them as they went out to start anew somewhere else. She'd noticed something was off, likely noticed from the start that something was off, but she was dutiful. She was obedient. She loved him more than he could ever love her. He would never have let her go near that field again if he had. She was coming in, carrying a basket of produce, and he would always remember the way she smiled when she saw him. Her face, that old young face of hers, stretched into a smile as she raised her hand to wave. Clarence had raised his hand to return her wave, had it half cocked, but it died on his wrist when she dropped into the earth. Dropped. That was the right word. She didn't sink. She wasn't pulled. It was as though a hole had opened up and swallowed her in one gulp. Her basket fell, tumbling vegetables across the dirt, and it was all the evidence that existed that she had been there at all. Clarence hitched in his breath as he stared at those rolling vegetables, the scream of rage and pain nearly ripping his throat apart as it rocketed into the world. It laughed at him as he dug up the field. Clarence dug it up in furious, crumping sweeps of the shovel, but he never found a trace of her. He stayed out there digging until well past moonrise, with only Fritz for company. She was the last sacrifice he was a part of. She was the last meat that Fritz didn't have to catch for himself. This was also the last time Clarence tried to square up with that terrible giant. It was black dark when he went inside, and it was past midnight when he stood in the shadow of the pumpkin again. He was drunk, weaving and bleary, and in his hand was a tin holder with a rag in the neck. Clarence had concocted this plan as he crawled head first into a jug of corn whiskey, and it was the best plan that he could think of. The coal oil would burn hot and bright, and when he threw it on the pumpkin, it caught immediately. He sat back and watched as the flames ate the fuel, but the pumpkin did nothing but laugh at his futile efforts. The slithering voice told him that he couldn't kill it that easy. It told him that the two were stuck together now, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. It had been wrong on that last account, or so Clarence hoped. He set up a fence after that, and never let the tourists come close again. They could pay their money, and they could observe from a distance, but no one was allowed to go into the field again. It cawed at him as Clarence sat in the chair by the fence. It said that this was a useless gesture, that it couldn't stop him if he wanted them, but he ignored it. He kept his vigil, kept his silence, and as the two lived, the town shriveled around them. It had gotten too powerful, too evil to be contained, and those who spent time close to it became susceptible to its voice. They came in the night, and they died silently in the field as they were drawn into the earth. The sheriff, the owner of the feed store, the girl who served the coffee at the diner, they all came to the field to give their lives to the gourd. Clarence tried to stop them, but no matter what he tried or how he fought, they all came to the gourd and gave it their life's blood. The town was deserted, a ghost town in a country full of ghost towns, and the only thing to see was Fritz. Fritz, the world's oldest pumpkin. They're both shriveled now, a couple of relics from a bygone age, and those who come to see them usually say how they saw Big Fritz when they were kids. Clarence still keeps his vigil, but the pumpkin's a lot more manageable now. He sits in a glass case, small and red and angry, and those who stand around looking too long always come away with headaches. For $5, you can get your selfie and have a pamphlet on the ninth wonder of the world, but the crowds have mostly gone now. He's a shriveled old thing, small as he was before Clarence gave him his first drop of blood, but if you spend too long in his company, you can hear his creaky old voice. You can start to feel his influence in your head. Spend too much time around him, and one night he might just draw you into the field and begin the cycle anew.
I swear, no matter how much you pay for a dryer, seems like it always eats a couple of socks. I seem to not have enough polka-dotted ones and have too many of the flat black color. Oh well, guess I'll have to go to Walmart and get some more socks while I'm at it. But not until we're done with today's stories, I think. I'm sure we've all done a little bit of home renovation in our time. I have an eave out back that I need to go replace myself before the squirrels decide that it's free real estate. But let's hope that in your search for home improvement, you don't find a black spot.
I won't go back to work tomorrow. I don't care what Jack says and how much he threatens to tell my probation officer. I will not hear the way my coworkers laugh at me. They tell me it's nothing, but they didn't see what I saw. They haven't seen the spot like I did today. Yeah, I did a little time. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to bullshit anybody and tell them a lie. I got a little too drunk one night and assaulted someone in a bar. It was my first offense, and I did my 2 years without much hassle. Hell, they even let me do the last year at work release, so I could keep paying my parents' mortgage for them. I have experience in construction, so it was a good fit. They set me up with a crew, doing drywall and laying flooring, and I worked for a good bunch of guys. It was a sweet gig, and it was a gig I was told I could keep after I got released. On the day I was released, I told them I'd see them in a few days and rejoin the real world. That, however, was the night my dad suffered a stroke. It was a bad one. Mom woke me up screaming, and we took him to the hospital in the back of an ambulance. Suddenly there were doctors to talk to, changes to make to the house I'd grown up in, and a man who'd once taken care of me to take care of. He'd lost function in nearly half his body, and with Mom feeling very overwhelmed, it became my job to take care of Dad. It wasn't until my probation officer informed me that I was in danger of violating my probation that I realized it had been almost a month since I'd been released. I understand that you've got some things going on, but you have to maintain employment as part of your probation. Your job with a construction firm says that they'll let you come back if you're still interested, but you have to have some income coming in by next week or risk violating your probation and going back to prison.
I went to the foreman the next day to see if I could get my old job back, but it appeared I was in for a surprise. "Yeah, sorry. We filled your spot on that crew. We didn't know if you were coming back, and we needed a full crew for the job." I gritted my teeth and resist the urge to rage at him. "Then why did you tell the probation officer I could come back?" "'Cause I have a new crew for you, if you're still interested in it." I told him I was, and he gave me a number to call. "That's Jack. He's been begging for another able body. Give him a call and see if you guys can meet up today." I thanked him, inwardly fuming that he'd already filled my position, and called the number. Jack answered on the third ring and told me that his crew left at 5 a.m. If I wanted a spot on it, I'd better be on the yard at 5 a.m., ready to work. I told him I would, and he hung up on me mid-sentence. I already didn't have a good feeling about this guy. He was terse, and didn't sound like the kind of guy you wanted to have a beer with after work. Regardless, I needed the work, so I set my alarm the night before and dragged up before dawn to meet this asshole at the yard at 5 a.m. And oh boy, had I been right in my hunch about this guy. Jack was one of those average-sized dudes who thinks he's a giant, the kind of guy who gets his ass beat in prison. He wore jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, with a gold chain that hung down into his thick chest hair. His hair was held in place with enough grease to change the oil in my car, and I saw him single me out the second I showed up. He had a small crew, maybe 10 guys, but the way he zoned in on me let me know that he'd been looking for me. Well, you actually showed up. Rick may speak highly of you, but I'm not just going to drop somebody down so some ex-con can have a job. You'll be cleaning the job site until I'm convinced that you're not going to show up high or just dip out in the middle of the day. If that's not okay with you, then you're going to go tell your probation officer to send you back where you came from." He turned and walked away, the crew piling into his truck as I stood there in stunned silence. I had to remind myself that I needed this job as I piled into the back of the truck with them. I had to remind myself a lot over the next few hours that Mom and Dad needed me home and not back in prison. We pulled up outside this dumpy-looking house in the suburbs just as the sun started to come up over the horizon. It was an old 2-story with a peeling exterior, and a yard that looked like it had last been mowed during the Bush administration. They had made a pathway up to the walk so that they could bring in their tools, and the grass looked stomped flat by the constant traffic. They had set up a generator near the porch, and a big metal dumpster created an island in the grass where they had just rolled it off and dropped it. All in all, it was a sloppy-looking sight, but I was in no position to throw stones. Jack collected us up on the porch so he could give out assignments. The old house was being renovated so the company could flip it, and he set several of us to ripping up carpet. After assignments were given, Jack and 3 others went upstairs to assess the damage, and I didn't see them come back until after lunch. I was set to pulling carpet in the downstairs living room. It was a dingy little room with a pair of small windows that reminded me of eyes. The carpet was disgusting, covered in hair and crumbs, and it was tacky like old soda had been spilled on it. I was sliding on my gloves when someone threw a crowbar on the floor and walked off. "Hey, aren't you going to help me?" I asked, but the guy who tossed the crowbar just shook his head. "We each get a room. This one's yours, so get to it." Then they left me to pull carpet in this big dirty room by myself. The living room wasn't huge, but it was still a lot to ask of one person. I pressed the crowbar in and pulled the carpet away from the wall, not bothering to be gentle. The drywall was going to be pulled out next, and I suddenly wondered why they were pulling the carpet out first. I shrugged. I wasn't the boss here, so I guess I'd just have to do as I was told. That was the first time I noticed the spot. It was in the corner of the living room, a big water stain that seemed to take up 2 walls. It was about the size of a basketball, and the water spot looked like it would be wet if you touched it. It kind of freaked me out, for some reason, though I couldn't tell you why at the time. As I worked, I could almost swear it was moving, just a little, and I got that feeling like eyes on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, the one that makes your hair prickle up, the one that makes you think you might be being watched. I tried not to let it bug me, but it was like I could feel that spot as I worked. The carpet didn't take too long. An hour later, I had rolled it up and was ready to haul it out. I looked around for help, but the others were still hard at it, or at least pretending to be. I could see 3 of them sitting around smoking or chatting for every one guy working. When I asked them to help me get the carpet out to the dumpster, they just scoffed and waved me off. I couldn't move it by myself, so I just left it in the living room and went to look for more carpet to pull. It seemed that my fellow workers weren't as diligent as I was, because there was still carpet in 3 rooms that seemed to need removing.
I sighed. This was clearly going to be my life for a while, and I set to work pulling the carpet to get ready to haul it all out. As I worked in a bedroom, the wall painted off blue with stormy-looking clouds on it, I got the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned to the door, thinking maybe one of my coworkers had come to see who was making so much noise back here, but there was no one. I looked to the window, but it was so caked with dust that no one could have seen anything through it. I glanced over to the closet, thinking maybe someone was lurking in there, and that was when I saw the source of my discomfort. A basketball-shaped spot on the wall over the closet door. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It was just a water spot. The house was probably full of them, and I just happened to have found one that looked exactly like the other one I had seen. I kept working, pulling up tack strips in places, but it still felt funny, like something was watching me. As the carpet rolled up, I began to push it towards the door, sending up puffs of smoke as it thumped over. As I pushed, I couldn't help but glance at that spot. It was still there, hanging over the closet door, seeming to watch me as I worked. I turned to look at it squarely and gasped as I noticed a large white hole in the middle of the spot, like an eye floating in a puddle. I ran out of the room then, bumping into another worker as I beat a hasty retreat. "There you are," he said tersely. "We've been looking for you. Come help us move this carpet." I was more than happy to oblige, anything to get out of that room, and we spent the rest of the morning hefting carpet. We pulled it to the dumpster, tossing it in haphazardly, and then assessed the work for tomorrow. As we broke for lunch, I had almost forgotten about the spot. People being around me made me feel a little crazy about being afraid of it, but as we worked, I could swear I saw it again and again. The walls were covered in stains. The pipes were likely bad, but this one was definitely the same spot. It had the same wobbly edges and deep black center as the one I'd seen the first time. The white circle was gone, though, but I still found myself looking for it when I was in a room. The guys on the crew must have noticed because they started making jokes about how prison had made me jumpy. "He's got to check all the corners when he comes in to make sure no booty bandits are lurking," a big, slovenly one in overalls would say, and they'd all laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. If I didn't need this job so bad, I'd have made something of it. We moved upstairs eventually, finding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that needed carpet or flooring removed. By 5 o'clock, we had all the carpet out of the house and in the dumpster out front. Jack came back in a truck, handing out paychecks and thanking the guys for their hard work. When he came to me, he handed me the check grudgingly, scowling the whole time and holding it when I tried to take it from him. "Tomorrow I expect some real work out of you, not just half-assing it like you did today." I took the check and walked off. I'd find my own way back. The next day was a little better. Drac said that the drywall would come next, and then he and his cronies disappeared out to the truck while the rest of us worked. We all started tearing out drywall, dust and nails flying, and I meant to swing my hammer into that spot extra hard when I saw it. To my disappointment, though, the spot never showed up. I'd seen it everywhere yesterday, seen it in every room at least once, but today it was absent. We spent the day tearing out drywall and cleaning up after ourselves. When 5 o'clock came, we packed up and went out to get paid. Today had been better. Nothing builds camaraderie like a little hard work, and I found myself joining in on the jokes and conversation that happened in the group. We were covered in drywall dust as we walked out that afternoon, laughing about how Tony had been scared by a rat when it burst out of the drywall in the laundry room. Jack looked at them coldly, affronted that they had accepted me so easily. He handed me my check in silence, and I piled into the back of the truck with the others this time. The next day was the last day I'd get to work with them. We spent that day hanging drywall downstairs. Between the 10 of us, we worked diligently and quickly. The drywall went up a sheet at a time, something I was pretty good at, and I was glad to see it covered the hollow studs and the newly blown-out insulation. We marked a few spots where the beams were rotten, but the pipes actually looked pretty good, as did the electrical. I began to wonder what had made the spots I kept seeing. They looked so wet, but I pushed it out of my mind as I worked beside my newfound companions. By 5 o'clock, we'd done most of the downstairs, and we'd have the rest finished by tomorrow so we could move upstairs. When I walked out onto the porch, though, I realized I'd forgotten something. I had rubbed at my wrist, looking for the reassuring feel of metal that had gotten me through 2 years in the can, but I found only bare skin. My heart skipped a beat. My dad's watch was gone.
When I remembered that I had laid it on the counter, not wanting it damaged while I was working, I must have forgotten all about it in the bustle. I grabbed my check and turned to go back in the house, Jack scowling at me as I walked off. "We're leaving," he called to my back, but I waved him off. "If you're gone when I get back, I'll just find my own way." I wasn't about to leave my watch here overnight. I went to the kitchen and checked the counter, but there was nothing there. It was powdery with dust from today's work, and I thought I could see an indent where the watch had been. I checked underneath the counters and around the floor, but I couldn't find my watch. I began to look around, hoping it hadn't found its way into someone else's pocket. I walked through the rooms, looking into each of them, to see if I'd maybe left it there, and when I looked into the living room, I was rewarded for my effort. Sitting in the dead center of the debris-riddled floor was my missing watch. I took a step, but something brought me up short. A little tickle on the back of my head told me that it was a little too convenient. It was like a trap baited with something for an unlucky animal to blunder into. I shook it off. I wanted my watch, damn it, and I wasn't going to just abandon it because I had a hinky feeling. I bent down to get it, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was pulsating, sludgy, something that I had seen soaking into the new drywall. I looked up exasperated, figuring that someone had put a nail through a pipe at some point today. But what I saw drew me up short. I was left half bent, filled with fear, as I saw the oozy black spot seething on the drywall. It was bigger than a basketball now, its inky depth seeming to beat like a heart. As I watched, I could see 2 white circles materializing out of the soup. They rolled around like lost eggs and finally came to rest in the middle of the sludge. I wanted to run. I didn't want to see whatever was in that thing, but I was trapped like a deer in headlights. I felt my breath hitching in my chest and could only wait for my legs to regain their strength. The white orbs rolled around in the soup and became eyes. They blinked at me, their centers trained on me as I bent there. All at once, a Cheshire cat smile floated under them as it beamed at me. I was stuck looking into that inky hole, the edges dribbling down the fresh drywall as it oozed and ran. Suddenly I was sure that part of that darkness was ahead with the eyes that were looking out at me from whatever inky void it inhabited, maybe with hands that wanted to pull me into that dark hole it inhabited. As if it had read my mind, I saw dark hands grip the edges of the spot, trying to pull itself out and enter my world. It never lost eye contact as it pulled itself out, and I could see the vague outline of its head as it came free of the spot with that placental pop. It was all I needed to see. Suddenly my legs were moving in overtime, my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I was out the door and slamming it behind me before I could quite remember how I had gotten onto the porch. Even through the blood pounding in my ears and the rubber of my sneakers pounding on the wooden floor, something else dominated my hearing, and there was one sound that I would never forget. I may not be able to remember how I came to be on the porch, heaving and gasping for air, but I do remember the sound I heard just before I threw the door open and I was free. It was a plop and a splatter, similar to a bucket of paint being emptied on the ground. I ran home, calling Jack as I took off up the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm not coming back for you. I told you that I was..." "Jack, you got to get somebody back to the site. Someone's there." "Who?" Jack asked, and I could hear his skepticism. "If this is some kind of goof, I don't get it." I told him how I had gone back for my watch and I'd seen someone skulking about the site. I didn't tell him about the oozing hole in the wall. He'd see that. However, I did tell him that I had thought the guy might be on drugs, so he should probably be careful. He was banging his fists on the drywall, so I booked it, I finished, trying to keep it believable. The crew was just starting to warm up to me, and I didn't want them to think I was a nut job. "Jesus Christ, I thought you ex-cons were tough. I'll go have a look. You just stay home. I'll let you know what I find." That was hours ago. Since I got home, I've been in my room, waiting on Jack to call, and I decided to write this while I waited. When I opened my laptop, though, my desire to get this down became all the more prevalent. As I slid it open, I caught a glimpse behind me and realized that I'll be fortunate if I have time to finish this tale. I could see a basketball-sized hole reflected in the screen of my laptop. I got up and locked the door and moved my writing to the living room. I don't know if the locked door will stop whatever may come from that dribbling hole, but I know that it may give me enough time to finish this before it breaks the surface. Keep your eyes peeled for water spots. You never know what might come slipping out.
Well, darn. I can't seem to find my comfy pajama pants that I put in. I was really hoping to wear those while I told stories, but I guess I'll just have to settle for my grubs. Good set of grubs is always something you want in life. A nice, comfy set of clothes to just do your household chores in and feel a little better about having to do manual labor while you're off the clock. I've had my fair share of strange jobs. Most of you know that corrections is no bed of roses most of the time. But I hope that in your search for employment, you don't run afoul of a job like today's original poster did. God forbid you find yourself working for Black Site 7.
I'm in the wind now. I'm sure I'll be dead by tomorrow, but I need to let people know this thing is loose. I'm an agent with the United States government, and my station is Black Site number 7. I won't tell you my name. It wouldn't matter much anyway. But this was not how I saw my life going. I spent 6 years in Iraq, signed up right after high school. It was nothing like the recruiter told me it would be. I spent 8 hours in the blistering heat. I hauled my fair share of comrades out of firefights, and I saw a lot of crap out there that would make an ordinary person go crazier than I might be. I've had a camel spider crawl on me while I sleep. I watched friends I've known since basic get decapitated through binoculars, burned houses full of insurgents and civilians to rubble, and a lot of other things I really don't like to talk about. When I was done, they gave me my papers, thanked me for my service, and sent me home. I know I have no right to complain. Many guys didn't make it back. But home was worse. I'd spent 6 years in an active combat zone, and now I was just, supposed to come home and go back to civilian life? I spent 3 months in the civilian world. 2 of those months were spent in crappy apartments because my parents couldn't handle the night terrors and the jumpy Marine that their son had become. Every car horn, every barking dog, every firework rattling in the street had me reaching for my gun or breaking into a cold sweat when I couldn't find it. Before TJ found me, I was honestly considering killing myself. Then one day, he was just at my door with that big shit-eating grin he'd always worn in the desert. "You look like hell, Hoss. Let me get you some pancakes. I got something I want to discuss with you." TJ was my platoon leader in the sandbox. They called him the comedian because he was always smiling, always cracking jokes. He was a functional sociopath. I guess most of us were. I always admired his ability to laugh in the face of the messed up stuff we did. TJ is not his real name, clearly, but since he's still in this crap and I've left it behind, I figure the best I can do is not remind them that he's why I'm here. So he took me to breakfast. In the back of a crowded Denny's, he laid it all out for me. "You got it bad, Hoss, but that's okay, 'cause old Uncle TJ has the cure for you. Got a new job, familiar work that might interest you. Ever hear of Two Trees?" As it happened, I had. Two Trees was a government institute that, on the surface, did a lot of medical research and clinical trials. Underneath, though, they did wet work, and anyone who was involved in covert ops knew about Two Trees. We'd worked with them a few times in Iraq, and their guys were spooky, to say the least. "You're looking at the new head of Black Site number 7. I furrowed my brow at him. "Congrats. Should I know what that is?" "Of course not. It's a closely guarded government secret. Two Trees is paying me a small fortune to keep it that way. Problem is, I need someone to curate the site for me. Someone with military training, experience with firearms, and a need for some normalcy. Know anyone that might fit that bill, Hoss?" I knew what he was asking, but I didn't think I was the one he was looking for. I hadn't found work in 3 months since I'd been back, and most of that was because I couldn't settle into anything. I was constantly jumpy, constantly on edge, and that makes it hard to find work. No one wanted you doing security work or minding a gas station when every backfiring car was an enemy combatant. What would happen if I had an episode in a government facility of all places? I shook my head.
Thanks, but no thanks. I don't think I'm fit for duty the way I am. Yeah, I thought you might say that. He pulled a metal tin out of his front pocket and slid it across the table. Your medical file reads like a bench work for PTSD, night terrors, irritability, being on edge, those irrational bouts of anger that got you thrown out of your parents' house. I felt defensive. How did you know about that? You'd be surprised what my level of clearance will get you. The therapist records were about as hard to get as a beer at a gas station. Well, I got a little present for you, Hoss. Welcome to the rest of your life, he said, tapping the outside of the silver case. The case was about as big as an Altoids tin. There were no markings on it, no filigrees or needless ornaments, and it had the distinctly surgical look that you usually see with military tech. I slid my hand towards it, but I didn't seem to want to touch it. Every sense I had told me to walk away right now, not to touch that thing, and just walk away from this unassuming little case. I forced my hands to pop it open instead. Inside was a pair of gray gel caps. What are these? These are the answer to your prayers. 2 of these a day will make you feel as calm and clear as you did when you were a lad of 18. No more jumping at every noise. No more reaching for your gun when a dog barks or a car backfires. Just peace of mind. Looking back, that's probably what Mephistopheles said when he spoke to Faust. What's the catch? These pills are only available through the Two Trees Corporation. Employees who agree to be part of the clinical trials get them free of charge. But they're only available to employees, he said, with a little grin. Take them. Take a day to feel the effects, and let me know what you think. Call me tomorrow and give me your answer. Enjoy a night of freedom, then make your decision. I took the pills home with me, and after a few hours of staring at them, I took them with some vodka. The effects were sudden and immediate. If you've never had PTSD, then it's hard to explain, but it's like having a loose wire and someone suddenly fixes it. Then you go back to the way you used to be. My anxiety just melted away. My fear dissipated. My unease and dread were gone, and my anger seemed like a distant memory. I was sitting in my crappy apartment, surrounded by the trappings of my depression and my anxiety, and suddenly, I felt like I had before I boarded that bus in 2003 and headed out to basic training. I was finally comfortable in my own head. It was like coming back to a safe place after years of running from danger. After the first good night's sleep I'd had since shipping out, I called TJ and told him I was in. One question, I asked. What's in the pills that makes them work so well? He was silent for a long minute, and then finally he said, You really don't want to know, Hoss. Pack your stuff. There will be a moving truck to take you to West Virginia in the morning. And that is how I came to work at Black Site number 7. I must have looked like a junkie by the time I pulled up in front of my new house. I didn't have much. The truck had taken all 4 boxes into the deep woods as I followed in my old compact. The journey took me about 16 hours, and by the time I got there, I was starting to feel the anxiety creep back in. I became angry at how slow the truck was going, afraid that this whole thing was a trick and they would kill me. By the time I arrived, I found myself wanting to die, hoping for death, so I could return to the quiet that had been in my head before. That was when I saw TJ standing at the gate of what looked like an old military checkpoint. He flashed that knowing smile and handed me another silver case. I dry swallowed the pills without a word and felt the inner peace worming its way back into my brain. Then he showed me to my new quarters. It was a little bunk room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a locker for my clothes. There was a foot locker for my personal stuff, and I was told to keep the place clean. I would be responsible for the site and its security. TJ showed me a terminal off the bedroom for monitoring and camera feeds. The compound had cameras all over the place, but I appeared to be the only person here full-time. Site's mostly for storage these days, but it's what we get up to here at night that may interest you. That's why you're here. I need someone I can trust to watch this site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 4 times a year, you'll be relieved for a week of R&R somewhere. But other than that, this is your world, Hoss. That didn't bother me. I had no problem being alone after 3 months of people. What I was curious about was what I would be doing out here. What am I looking at exactly? TJ pointed at the 3 buildings on the camera. Truck comes twice a week. Let them through the gate and don't bother them. They'll take what they need from the building and won't bother you either. Keep nosy people out. Lethal force is authorized, and don't ever go in there, or I'll have to show you where Black Site 8 is, he said with a smile. The smile
didn't make it to his eyes. Don't worry about being vigilant, though. If anything bigger than a mouse moves out there, the alarms will let you know about it right away. He told me that my food would be delivered once a week, mostly MREs, and I could order anything I wanted from the terminal in the living room. There was a workout yard near the second building, and I could move through the woods if I chose, as long as I took my phone with me so I could get alerts from the console. By the way, hand me your phone, he said. When I did, he put it in his pocket and handed me a new one. That's your new phone. I'll take the keys to your car, too, and put the money in your account. This is your life now, Hoss, so don't take this job lightly. If you leave the grounds, we'll know. If you try to update social media or try to tell anyone on the outside about what you've seen here, we'll know. If you want to get married or feel like you need out, arrangements can be made after your first 5-year tour. As far as anyone is concerned, you no longer exist. Don't be stupid. Put in your 5 years, and we'll reassess your position then. He grinned again and punched me in the arm. And lighten up. This'll be the easiest 5 years of your life. From that point on, I was an employee of Two Trees. TJ had been right. The first 5 years flew by. I lived on the site, spending my days working out or watching TV. I played the latest video games and watched the newest movies. Twice a week, as advertised, a truck rolled up and honked. I would check the cameras, open the gates, and they would do the rest. They would honk when they were ready to leave, and I left them alone. The trucks always had the Two Trees logo on them, and they never popped in to give me any crap, and I never went out to give them any. I never tried to get into the warehouses. I'd been a soldier long enough to know how to check my curiosity, and the scares were minimal. The food kept coming, the pills kept coming, and kept me in the right mind, too, and it was pretty peaceful, all told. The alarms, to my knowledge, only went off 3 times in that first year. 2 of those times, it was a deer who had wandered too close. The first time it happened, I had slunk out in a panic, service pistol in hand and boxer shorts flapping. As I rounded the first warehouse, I drew down on a very surprised doe, who darted away before I could draw a bead on her. It was kind of a special moment for me. I had never seen a deer up close, and as it ran away, I was glad I hadn't shot it. The third time the alarm went off, it was a person, though. It was the first person I'd seen in 3 months. I'd been sitting at the console one night watching the latest Marvel Avengers movie. I think it might have been Infinity Wars. When the alarm went off, I paused the movie, expecting to see a deer or a rabbit on the monitor. My eyes went wide, though, when I realized it was a person. He had a crowbar. He was attempting to pry the door open. He must have come out of the woods, because if he had driven up, I would have known about it sooner. It had been 3 months since I'd seen another person. The last one had been Agent Daughtry, who'd come to relieve me for a week of R&R in September. The idea of seeing a person not connected with Two Trees made me feel weird. Even when you were on R&R, you went to a company resort or a company place full of company people. This stopped you from getting a little too drunk and talking about all the stuff you did for your country. It was a great idea, but it meant you had nearly no interaction with civilians. I took my pistol out and crept up on him in near silence. When my foot came down on an extra crunchy stick, he turned his head and noticed me. He raised the crowbar as if to attack, and the rest was instinct. The gun went off without me having even spoken to him, reflexes taking over and dropping the threat before it could become a real danger. His left eye popped like an overripe fruit, and he fell down on the hard December ground. I called TJ, and he and some of the other men in suits came to assess the damage. You did just right, Hoss. He was a threat to the facility and needed to be put down. Don't think for a minute that this reflects poorly on you. What will you do with him? I asked. TJ smiled. Immediate disposal, Hoss. Think you got the stomach to help us? I found that I did, and once he was doused in gasoline, we set him ablaze at the edge of the property. They gave me a week of R&R for that, and when I came back, TJ must have decided that I was worthy of being brought in on certain things. The alarm went off about a week after I'd come back from R&R, and I saw a black car rolling up the front gate. TJ stepped out of it and waved as it stopped in the concrete roundabout, other men getting out as well. I slid my shoulder holster on and went out to meet him. It was 11 p.m., and a visit this late was highly irregular. As I approached the vehicle, 2 guys in suits were bringing a man with a bag on his head out of the car. He was wearing scrubs, his hands bound behind his back, and I could hear him crying beneath the black hood he wore. I looked between them, waiting for an explanation, and TJ threw an arm around me and walked me towards the spot where we had burnt the trespasser. Hoss, I think it's time that we bring you in on the second reason for black sites. You see, sometimes Two Trees has assets that need to be eliminated. The black sites are often used for this purpose. It's always the responsibility of the site's caretaker to carry out the elimination. Fringe benefits, I suppose you could say. Why wasn't I told this before, I asked, feeling indignant. I'm no murderer. Oh, well, those combatants in Iraq will be glad to hear that, won't they? He said almost snidely. That was war, TJ. This is murder. Think of this as war too, Haas. These people are enemies, and they need to be eliminated for the good of the public safety. It's part of the job, Haas, a part I know firsthand that you're capable of. They put the man on his knees in the middle of the burn spot, and I could hear him praying under that hood as we stood around him. Put him down, Haas. That's an order, TJ said. And if I won't, I said, looking at him icily. The two men on either side drew their guns, and TJ grinned. Then I'm afraid that these men will have to execute both of you. Come on, Haas. Don't throw this away over some nobody. He's no different than the man outside the warehouse. Looking back, I kind of just wish I'd let them shoot me. But I guess if I had, you'd never know about any of this. Instead, I drew out my gun and put a bullet in his skull, glowering at TJ as his buddies put their guns away. You made the right choice, Haas. Who knows? You might not have to do this more than a dozen times in the next 4 years. On that note, he was wrong. I executed an asset a month after that. They were mostly people in scrubs, people in lab coats, doctors, researchers, people who had likely tried to steal from whatever facility they worked at. They were men, women, old men, and scared 20-somethings. I never bothered to learn their names. They were just assets that needed to be eliminated. I became kind of numb to the process. We burned them afterwards. Gasoline and fire made it like they were never there. The spot near the edge had a charred look to it for a while after that. At the end of 5 years, TJ came to see me and asked if I wanted to re-up. What happens if I walk away? I asked. I was eating dinner when he came by, and he had sat down to have a plate of fettuccine with me. Given my free time, I had learned to do a good number of things that I couldn't before. I became a pretty good cook. I learned to play the guitar, read every book on the shelf I had bought to hold them, and there was a chainsaw out back along with some sculptures I had made with it. I couldn't say I hadn't enjoyed my time here, the killings aside, but I was curious to know if they'd actually let me leave. You'll be allowed to return to the real world, your bank account fuller and your retirement substantial. Just watch what you say out there. I'd hate to have to bring you back for your replacement to put a bullet in. I ended up signing up for another 4 years. I shouldn't have done that. I was 8 years deep when they brought the girl in the black bag to me. It was 2 a.m., and I had started to think about going to bed when the alarm went off. I saw the town car rolling up and looked for TJ. He was not the one that climbed out, however. This guy had his hair slicked back, his suit a perfect blue pinstripe. He didn't wave at me, and I felt a sense of dread as I grabbed my gun. Somehow I expected TJ to be under that bag this time. The man's name was Stein, and luckily he did not have TJ under that bag. What he did have was a kid with a thick black bag over their head. I couldn't tell at first if it was a boy or a girl. They were dressed in baggy clothes, Salvation Army rags that a homeless guy would be embarrassed to wear, and they were crying loudly under their hood. 2 familiar men had the kid, and they both looked stoic about the whole matter. Stein didn't say anything, just led the procession over to the charred spot and put the kid on their knees. When he didn't take the hood off, I did it myself. He winced, but he didn't stop me. This was my place, my job, and I had garnered a reputation for being a professional, a reputation I was about to ruin. The bag came off, and the little girl's tear-streaked face came into view in the harsh fluorescence. Her hair was cut short, dirty blonde, and her face was covered in bruises. Her nose looked broken, her lip split. The blood trickled down her face like red tears, and they mingled with her actual tears as they fell to the damp earth. I sighed, looking at Stein as the gun stayed at the ready. The hell is this? Stein looked surprised. It's an asset. TJ said you could handle these for us. Handle the asset. This is a kid, barely old enough to wipe her own ass. What could she have possibly done? Stein's face was stony. Yours is not to question, soldier. Liquidate this asset, or be liquidated. I looked at the kid, her whole face shaking as the tears and blood fell, and I thought about watching her head pop like a grape. This wasn't some scared adult, some stoic old man, some praying woman, or some cursing thing in a sallow skin. This was a kid. I had killed a lot of people, more in my time here than I ever had during war, but I was still a professional. Professionals had standards. No, I said. Stein blinked. What? No, I don't kill kids. Do it yourself. The 2 men drew their guns, and I was transported back in time. I was standing there, 2 days after Christmas, watching TJ grin and tell me the rules. Now I was standing in the woods, the autumn leaves carpeting the ground,
feeling sure that it would soon drink both my blood and the girl's. "I'll give you till the count of 3 to kill the girl. After that point, you will both be executed. 1. Their guns were unwavering, but so was my resolve. 2. I closed my eyes and prepared to die. 3. I heard a sound like wet concrete splitting open. It was followed by a high-pitched scream and a pair of bodies hitting the ground. I opened my eyes and saw Stein running towards the town car, his composure gone. The 2 men who'd been holding me at gunpoint were bleeding out on the ground from large, grisly neck wounds. As I watched Stein run, a rust-red something snapped out and caught him in the back of the neck, dropping him inches from the town car. The red thing protruded from the front of his neck, and he gasped futilely as he lay dying. I looked back in the direction of the thing that had snapped out and saw that the girl was now a mass of red spikes, segmented like spider legs. Her face had split down long ways, forcing her face into a grisly sideways maw. The area between the teeth glowed a deep red, and I could see the eyes on the girl's face blinking erratically. The 2 halves of her smile grinned at me, and the effect was a little dizzying. I figured for the second time that day that I was going to die, but she scuttled off into the woods instead, walking on her strange spidery appendages as she crashed through the trees. I stood there for a few minutes, not quite sure I believed I wasn't dead, and then I started running too. I crashed through the woods for hours, running in no particular direction, sure that at any minute the creature or a helicopter from 2 trees would fall on me and either rip me to pieces or just blow me away. I was blundering off with no wallet, no cell phone, just my gun and the clothes I'd been wearing. Was the phone how they tracked me? TJ hadn't said as much, but I kind of figured it was. When the ground went out from under me, I felt the air drop out of my lungs. I fell 5 feet off the muddy ledge and skinned my hands. My knees hurt where I had landed on them, and I realized pretty quick that I had fallen onto the road. If I thought it might be an illusion, the headlights that pinned me to the ground a moment later left me with little doubt. I was kind of numb to the idea of dying at this point, and I just lay there waiting to be run over. Thankfully, the truck stopped, and after a short conversation with the driver, he offered to take me into town. That's how I came to be here in this dingy hotel that just happens to have a computer in the lobby. I sold the gun for about $500 and figured I'd disappear as soon as I'm done writing this. They know I'm gone now, but I don't know if they think I'm dead or if they think I ran. Either way, they'll find me. I'm pretty sure of it. I'm more worried about the little girl that's loose in the woods, and whatever it is that's living beneath their skin. If you see a young girl with short, dirty blonde hair, do not approach her. I don't know if she killed those men to get away, or if she killed them because she wanted to, but she should be considered dangerous if you encounter her in the wild. And if a man from 2 Trees offers you a job, do not become the new curator of Black Site 7. The job is definitely not at all what it appears to be.
Looks like I'm down to the bottom of the basket, which is good because you can't see it just out of sight, but there's a whole sink full of dishes to keep me occupied for at least the next couple of hours. But I might have time for something in the meantime. Maybe a pot of tea, though I was thinking about a cup of coffee before I saw the story that's coming up next. I'm a coffee drinker myself. I've never made any bones about that, but sometimes it might be best to find your caffeine elsewhere, especially if you've got an experience like today's storyteller as he goes for yet another cup of black coffee.
I don't know what I'm going to do. They won't stop pounding on the door. They won't stop calling my name. And before long, someone with keys is going to come along and unlock my office. I don't know what to do. Completely out of my element here. And all my brain can come back to is that coffee. The coffee. The goddamn coffee. First cup of the morning? He'd asked. And all I could do was smile at him. He must be new. Because if he'd been here longer than a week, he'd know how often I show up to this machine. I stood before the coffee pot like a worshiper at the altar, and as the savory black liquid spilled into the pot, I felt my mouth water at the thought of coffee. First cup. Yeah, right. I started my day with the taste of warm, fresh brewed coffee. As I'd cooked my breakfast, I'd had another, savoring this one a little, as I never did the first cup. And as I sat down to catch up on my emails, I drank a third as I ate my breakfast. I'd had another one on the way to work, savoring the aroma as I sat in traffic, and now it was time to get a cup before I sat down for another day of work. First cup. Try fifth. I've been like this since my late teens. My mother was a career nurse who drank coffee by the pot, not the cup. As a single mother trying to keep up with an active son, there was never a time I can't remember when coffee wasn't part of our lives. When I was just a tyke, my mom was always running late due to my inability to get moving in the morning. No one wants to lose their job because their kid can't get ready on time, so one morning, she gave me a sippy cup of coffee, sweetened with milk and sugar. No surprise, I took to it like a fish to water. The other parents looked at her funny when she told them. She heard the usual sermons about how coffee would stunt my growth and make me hyper, but she always felt she knew better. The fact that I was never prone to hyperactivity and grew to top out about 6 feet seemed to have proven their worries were groundless. Coffee is life for me. It runs through my veins, and I always joke that when I die, I'm going to donate my body to Starbucks. I can be their flavor of the month. That cup looks a little rough, don't you think? I turned to see Chuck wander into the break room then, unrecognizable health smoothie in his My Body is a Temple shaker cup. The new guy greeted him as he came in, and I extended my hand for a fist bump. As he met my knuckles with his, I couldn't help but shudder a little at how scaly and clammy his skin always is. You'd think with all that rabbit food he ate that those healthy shakes would make his skin a little softer, or at least clear up his skin condition. It's got character, Chuck, unlike whatever you're drinking there. Chuck laughed. If character is what you call mushrooms growing in the bottom of that thing. He was right. Not about the mushrooms, but about the state of my cup. I'd had this cup for 3 years, and in that time I had never once bothered to wash it. The outside was a little stained up, but otherwise looked pretty normal. The inside, however, was a dark cauldron of old coffee stains and filth. It didn't look that bad to me, but of course I had gotten used to it by now. I always justified it by telling myself that I was putting boiling water into it, so anything living in there was likely to get boiled out of existence by the time I got around to drinking the coffee. I had no idea what I was setting myself up for. The hot liquid splashed into the cup with a luxuriant sound. I swirled the contents around in the cup before taking a test sip and gasping in pain. It was much too hot, but I had known that already. I talked with Chuck a few more minutes, and when Mr. Ryan strode into the break room, we all said our goodbyes and left for our desks. Mr. Ryans was a fantastic boss, but he had a very narrow opinion on dawdling and socializing on company time. I said hi to a few other people on my hall and stopped at Rob's door to pass a few words. He was hard at it already, and I could see his tongue sticking out through his teeth, a nervous habit he said he'd had since elementary school. His dark hair looked sweaty, and when I asked him if he was okay, he said he had to make an 8 o'clock deadline, but maybe he could catch up at lunch. I said that sounded great, and as I walked to my office, I saw that Lisa was already behind her computer as well. Lisa was a mousy new girl that had moved into the office across from mine a few months ago. She was about my age, with straight brown hair that she always piled neatly on her head, and she had a cute pair of black glasses that were constantly needing to be pushed up the bridge of her nose. She didn't say much, but we waved at each other most mornings, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have just a little bit of a crush on her. She waved back, smiling in her shy way, and went back to work as I stepped into my office and closed the door. I sat the coffee on my desk and turned on my computer as I prepared to start another day. I'm an IT specialist, so my job is mostly fixing other people's problems. There was an email already from Janice about how her monitor wouldn't come on, and another from Steven about how his issues with the network had gotten out of hand again. I sipped my coffee as I read these, testing the hot liquid with my lips before committing to the sip. I reached for the phone so I could call Janice. Janice was a frequent caller. The IT guy before me had thought it was funny to give her the most ancient of our relic computers. I'd been keeping that dinosaur running for years now, and every time the budget committee told me they didn't have enough money for a new computer, I died a little inside. I called Steven, and after a few questions it became apparent that his problem was of his own making again. He'd opened another questionable email, and now his computer wouldn't link to the network. That was by design. Steven was notorious for opening anything that found its way into his inbox. He'd brought the network down several times with this sort of behavior, and I logged in remotely to revert it to a previous state, which solved the problem. The virus hadn't been that aggressive, it seemed, and he thanked me for helping him. I reached for my cup and found that it was empty. I'd been sipping the coffee while I was on the phone with Steven, and I'd drank more than expected, I guess. I called Janice and asked her what was going on with her computer, and after a few sentences, I reached into the drawer and found a new power cord. The computers seemed to burn through them for some reason, and I'd recently made a note to keep them in stock. I locked my computer, grabbed my coffee cup, and figured I'd stop for a fresh cup on the way to Janice's office. I stepped out into the hallway, turned left, and stopped dead in my tracks. My cup shattered on the carpeted floor, and that drew the creature's attention at the end of the hallway. It was hideous. It had a bulbous gray head that was covered in coarse black hair, and the small white eyes that dotted its head were awful looking. Its jaw lolled open to reveal a mouthful of sewing needle teeth and a flicking red tongue that constantly moved over them. It was dressed in a white button-up shirt and a pair of black slacks, but the shirt bulged with coarse black hair, and the pants looked to be barely containing its oddly shaped legs. It looked at me, and for a second, eyes blinked in an odd succession before it raised a hand to ask if I was okay. I shuddered and felt my knees unhinge as I slid to the wall. It sounded like Rob. Rob's voice was coming out of this creature's mouth, and as it did, I could feel my mind slipping a little. What the hell was going on? Had I been drugged? Were they playing a trick on me? As the Rob creature made its way up the hall, I saw another thing stick its head out of the break room. It looked like an enormous bat head stuck in a business suit, and in one clawed, scaly hand, it held something that looked like Chuck's smoothie shaker. He didn't even look real. The creature looked like a photorealistic movie monster, or images from a horror site when someone has drawn creatures that just look a little too real. As the Rob creature got closer, I could see small sores on its skin, long curly hairs sprouting in places between its eyes, and I felt a scream ripping its way up my throat. The Chuck creature blinked his two big eyes at me. "What's wrong? You okay?" It came blundering out of the break room and towards me, and I felt my legs finally take orders as I backpedaled towards the exit door. It was 30 feet away, down several hallways, but I felt like I was motivated enough to run a mile in a minute flat. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong, and until I knew what was going on, I wasn't sure I could trust any of my senses. I had come to my office door when my back met resistance, and I realized I had bumped into someone. I turned my head woodenly to see what new horror I had blundered into, and I felt a fresh scream rip through me. It was a spider, a giant spider, but with a body on top of its abdomen like some fantasy creature from a video game. Its torso was vaguely feminine, breasts poking from beneath a blue cardigan that hung over its shoulders. Its 8 chitinous legs clicked on the floor as it took a step backwards to assess me. It looked at me with familiarity, and I could see that it had shiny black hair piled on its head above its 8 rotating eyes. 2 eyes seemed to be covered by thin metal glasses, and I blundered towards my door as I realized who it was. The spider thing was Lisa. "Sorry, are you okay? I didn't mean to." I didn't let her finish. I pushed my way into my office and slammed the door behind me. I locked the handle, pushed my chair under it, and cringed against the farthest wall I could get to. What in the hell was going on? Had that been real? What was I seeing out there? That couldn't be my colleagues, could it? They had sounded like them, even sort of acted like them, but the creatures out there had been so nightmarish that I couldn't even process it. All I could do was huddle under my desk, knees pulled up to my chest, and try not to cry as someone knocked on the door. "You okay in there?" It was Chuck. "You scared Lisa half to death, man. I think she's crying in her office right now. Maybe you could come apologize?" I stiffened. Lisa was crying. Had I done that? I couldn't bear the thought that I had made Lisa cry. I had half risen from under my desk when I'd finally gotten hold of myself again. This wasn't real. The monsters were trying to trick me so they could get me out of my office. I sat back down under my desk and squeezed my knees against my chest again. They wouldn't trick me like that. I wasn't going to be fooled so easily. Chuck banged on the door, harder this time, and asked what my problem was. Rob's voice made an appearance as well, and he apologized for startling me. They were worried about me and wanted me to come out so they could sort through this. They were scared for me and wanted to see me. They got angry at how I was acting and started banging louder all the while. I just huddled under my desk and sobbed quietly. I couldn't process what was going on or why this was happening. And all the avenues seemed to come back to the coffee. Someone had drugged me. Someone was messing with me. Someone had done this to make me freak out. But why? That was when the phone rang. It jangled merrily in the cradle, unaware of the horror show that was just outside the door. I looked up over the edge of my desk like a cartoon mouse peeking out of his hole. I almost expected the phone to grow fangs or sprout eyes, but it didn't. It just continued to be an average black plastic phone. I reached out shakily for it, and as my sweaty hands settled around it, I felt it solidify and had second thoughts about my perception. My desk was still here. My computer still hummed peacefully. If this was a world for monsters, then how could all these things exist? How would a monster type with big clawed hands? How would he sit in a normal chair? How would he pick up the phone? As I picked up the phone, I heard Mr. Ryan's calm voice wash over me. It took me a minute to realize that he was calling my name as I was just sitting there in the calm warmth of my realization. "Hello, sir?" I said, and my voice shook a little. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm and rich and made me feel like control had been restored. I don't know, sir. I'm seeing some weird stuff. Have you imbibed any substances today? It's okay if you have. I just want to know how we can help you. I just had a cup of coffee in the break room and coffee at home. I was fine when I got here, sir, and now I don't know what's going on. I'll be there in a few minutes. Just wait. And he hung up before I could tell him about the monsters. I hung up the phone and sat huddled under my desk. He wouldn't be able to get here, not with the monsters out there, and even if he could, would he be normal? Maybe this was just another trick by the monsters. I sat under my desk, shuddering and waiting for the creatures to break down my door and get me. They had stopped banging and shouting, but I could still hear them scuttling around out there. They were waiting, just waiting for me to drop my guard. Then they'd have me. 4 loud knocks made me jump and hit my head on the desk. "It's Mr. Rhines. Open the door, please, so we can talk about this." I slunk from under my desk, looking for all the world like a scared rabbit as I approached the door like I thought it might explode. Are the monsters gone?" He didn't answer right away, probably hoping he had misheard me. "Monsters?" I put my mouth close to the door jamb and whispered, "The monsters are out in the hall." No monsters. Why don't you let me in so we can talk about all this and get everything straightened out? Your friends and co-workers are worried about you and are anxious to get this sorted out. My hand shook as I set it on the doorknob. I must have been wrong. Maybe I just had a psychotic incident or something. Now everything was back to normal. I had acted like an ass and scared the hell out of everyone. It was time to go face the music, maybe find out what all this was about, and as I wrapped my hand around the knob, I was sure that everything would be back to normal when I opened the door. As the door came open, the worst horror of all was waiting for me. He was a demon. His skin was the color of burnt pork and was awash with cracks and blisters that opened and oozed as he stood before me. His hands were cruel claws sprouting from the cuffs of his Armani suit, and his wings extended like a miasma behind him. His face was a wide, lolling mouth. eyeless and earless, with a massive set of ram's horns that curled above the door jamb as he hulked in it. When he opened his mouth, I heard the voice of Satan himself, the lilting voice that invited Eve to eat an apple, and I knew that I would never be able to deny him if he spoke. Now, let's see what all this is. I slammed the door in his face, and they've been banging at it for nearly 30 minutes. So here I sit, writing my experience in the hopes that someone will take something from this before they burst through the door and get me. As I write, though, a sobering feeling has occurred to me. There's a mirror in my desk. As I write this, I can't help but look at the drawer and fight the urge to pull it out. As I sit here panicked, afraid that I have somehow found myself in a world of monsters, I never stop to think that maybe the problem is me. Maybe I've lived inside a delusion my whole life. Something in that odd cup of coffee triggered me to see the world for what it really is. Could it be possible that if I were to take that mirror out and look at myself, I could see my own scales and fangs and slime as well? Could it be that somehow the veil has been pulled away and I'm finally seeing the world for what it really is? I guess the lesson here is this: maybe a little soap and water is cheaper than the loss of your own sanity, and maybe I should have listened when they told me to clean my damn cup.
Big pile of freshly laundered towels. Is there anything better in the world? Well, while I put away my clothes and start on my next bit of chores, I do hope that you have enjoyed today's stories, and maybe you'll come back tomorrow for more great tales and more cozy horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.